Hello and welcome to the installment of the Wyfutbol podcast with me, Michael Dryden and Etchers Adokru. This week, in light of Ralph Rangnick's appointment to Manchester United, we take a look at Valeriy Lobanovskyi, the man regarded as being the inspiration behind the new United head coach's football and philosophy, and that of many other coaches in the game. Before we start, please follow us on Twitter at Yfootball_ and subscribe with us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Acast, and YouTube. Cheers, good evening. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. No complaints here. Arsenal about to kick off one of their games. One of their games. They're playing Everton. I don't know why I'm so vague as to who they're playing. But yeah, it's been a good week. Had a lot of Christmas dinners with friends last week, including yourself. We unfortunately watched Arsenal lose to United in a pub. There was a guy who was wearing terrible attire and looked god awful. He made a comment about the Arsenal seconds, but yeah, fair if he's listening and go to Marks and Spencer's and get a new wardrobe. Looked absolutely abysmal. It's because he was a United fan and I was fuming. I can't remember what he said. He said something like, I don't even know, but I was just there like, mate, go away. Was that Printworks on Saturday? I saw MK. To all my listeners, I didn't fully know who MK was, but then when I played his music on Spotify, I did recognize some of his big bangers. They all played, which was very good. I always think with DJs, though, right? That could be anybody.
Well, play the music.
Yeah, what? Yeah, how do you know it was MK? Could be John. Could be Phil with his dog. How do you know?
Well, there's more. There's probably more of an art to like turning up certain elements to the music. I'm not a sound technician, even though I do edit these podcasts. Maybe I am a sound technician, but anyway, there's probably more to it, and there probably is. So anyone who's listening who's a DJ, please get in touch and let us know either what really makes a live set different, or if you were in that live set and you're playing MK's music, how would you do it?
How would I do it?
Well, just any listener.
Yeah, fair, I was going to say, because I know how I'd do it. I'll just fucking put the track on and then just, yeah, that'd be it. I'd wave as well. So it looks legit that I'm the guy. But
Fair enough.
we'll leave that on there. How you doing, Jordan?
Yeah, not bad. I was also at MK, so and also at the Christmas do last night last week that you mentioned. So yeah, similar plans to you. Have been hard recently. Yeah, that United fan who came over, he had a proper grin on his face. When someone's about to say something about the team you support with a big grin on their face, and you just A, know it's going to be something rude, and B, it's just not going to be that funny.
Yeah.
You just know it, and I could see it as he was coming towards me or come towards us, and he was about to speak. I was thinking this is just not going to be relevant at all. Because I mean, we had our laptop at the restaurant, so I mean, like this guy, and I could see from across the room that he'd made eye contact with the laptop and was moving slowly towards it with this grin on his face. I was thinking, nah, this is going to be terrible, and it was. So fair play to him. But yeah. So Etches, why are we talking about Ralph Rangnick's inspiration, Valeriy Lobanovskyi, today?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of intrigue about Ralph's appointment for a variety of reasons. I think one, United fans are obviously a little bit triggered that they didn't get Antonio Conte, and I've got a man who is he's like a mentor for a lot of modern coaches. I think he's quite similar to Bielsa, and what I mean by that is he's inspired managers that, if I'm putting it bluntly, are a lot better than he is. I'd put Thomas Tuchel in that category, and I'd probably say Julian Nagelsmann as well. But he himself has been successful at previous clubs in terms of Hoffenheim, RB Salzburg. But when you talk about Man United, it's not underwhelming because of the work he's going to do afterwards, potentially as director of football, which he did very well at Salzburg. But he is one of those guys with a huge reputation, but it's more that his ideas have led for other innovative managers to really take to the fore and experiment with and make even better. So I think there's been a lot of intrigue around the appointment and how he will shape United in line for a next manager. That might be Pochettino, who knows. He was interviewed for the England job. I remember when Southgate took it on, there was talk of Ralph Rangnick getting interviewed, and English fans are like, who? He's not done anything in football. I think he's also heralded as being a leading force in moving German football away from its defensive sweeper-style characteristics to this fast, direct in terms of speed, not in terms of long balls, and also gegenpressing as well. And gegenpressing is the aim to impact the ball as quickly as possible. either by rushing the man or closing down potential passing options as well as rushing the man. And we've seen loads of top managers do it. Pep Guardiola does it very well. Klopp is relentless with it. Pochettino and Ralph Rangnick himself. The creator of the style is very hard to pinpoint to one person. I think I have to make that very clear. But it's that Valeriy Lobanovskyi's USSR and Dynamo Kiev's teams are one of the leading sides to popularize the style of football. Ralph Rangnick had this to say about him. He said, "In my first time coaching in my hometown in Bakanag, we played against Valeriy Lobanovskyi's Dynamo Kiev. I was on the pitch and I told the story many times that after 10 minutes, I had to count the players on the pitch because I felt as if they had one or two players more than my team. After the game, I spoke to Valeriy Lobanovskyi with a translator, and they told me they trained every day, pressing all over the pitch every time. So I went to see their training sessions, and from then on, I knew why they were playing like this, and that it was possible to play like this if you constantly work on this on a daily basis in training." So basically, either two things happened there. Ralph Ragnick was blown away by their style of play and had too many drinks the night before and was a bit weary as to how many players they had. Or the latter was just that the style of play, and this is obviously the likely option, is that the style of play was so impressive and relentless that it's something he'd never seen before. And that kind of inspired him to obviously coach the way he does. So I thought, let's look into Valeriy Lobanovskyi and kind of what's he about.
Yeah, and some further similarities with Marco Bielsa and that he's spying on training. Although it sounds like this, he was probably allowed onto the training pitch. I'd like to think so. So yeah, I mean, you fast forward to current day with Jurgen Klopp. There's often games I watch. I remember watching Liverpool against Leeds United at Elland Road earlier this season, and it, Liverpool could have had 8, and they probably could have had half that figure in the first half. Like they ran riot. If it wasn't for some fairly poor finishing, particularly by Diogo Jota that day, they could have done. And it looked throughout that game, because they're winning the ball so high up with so many men, that they had more players on the pitch. Because if you look at if you look at the pitch whilst that was happening, that getting pressing, their own half was probably completely empty. They've got the absolute full 11 or 10 in the other opposition's half, and then so many players, be it wing backs, as we've seen pushed so highly, obviously offensive players as well, and probably one of the support midfield players, just overloading. So, yeah, it rings true that um, Rangnick would have thought that there was too many players in the pitch at the time for the opposition. When we've seen that so often, or think we've seen that so often with current Liverpool. Go back to United. I mean, we did a podcast on director of football roles and what they were. We did that about a year ago. Probably was over a year ago actually, and we looked at the different clubs and who they had in these different positions. And I'm not saying Rangnick is going to be taking on a director of football role. It sounds like it's going to be more of on a consultancy basis, whatever that really means. But what is clear to date is that United really haven't had someone overseeing football operations, or as far as we know, we've had Ed Woodward as CEO. We've seen him in the press so often. Stories. I think there's one recently about Zlatan Ibrahimovic and his transfer, and just a lot of stories like that, which are just like embarrassing for the club, but also just signal the fact that why is someone like Ed Woodward so close to the first team operation? There should be someone in between. Chelsea have had that before with Petr Cech coming in. They've now got Granovsky here. I think Czech's still there, so they still work in tandem. But the point is, there's a link. Ajax have been championed for that with Overmars and Van der Sar. We could talk for ages on that, but United seemingly haven't. They have the board, the Glazers, they have Ed Woodward. There's probably other stuff kicking about, but between Ed Woodward and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who's there? There's seemingly no one. So they need someone in that position. There's Fergie, who's been in kind of an advisory role, but I think his overall kind of role at the club is still a little bit unknown, really. I mean, I could be enlightened on that, but I don't think it's too clear what he does. So someone like Rania coming in there, perhaps he would really have a great influence on the club going forward, which they need. I think that's very clear.
Yeah, I completely agree with that one as well. And yeah, United they've softened the blow being an Arsenal fan for so long because they've just not really done much, considering they were the dominant force in English football for the best part of nearly 2 decades. Or always there or thereabouts, even if they weren't top. And to see them where they are now was good, but it seems that they've taken a step in the right direction by hiring Ralph, and it remains to be seen if he's that guy, but it looks like he may well be. So who is Lobanovsky? That's the age-old question. Well, he was born in Kiev, which was then part of the USSR. Fairly brief playing career, and when he's playing 29, having played at Dynamo Kiev, Shakhtar Donetsk, and Kromorotz Odessa from the late 50s to the late 60s. He represented the Soviet Union twice before moving on to management, where he managed Dnipro Dnipropetrovsk, which
Nice.
he first club he managed from 68 to 73. He then moved back to Dynamo Kiev, where Lobanovskyi moved to his former club. He managed by a former teammate called Ole Bazilevich. These two worked as a duo until 1976, which reminds me of Roy Evans and Gerard Houllier at Liverpool. These two managed together for a lot longer, but 3 years roughly. But yeah, I remember Roy Evans and Gerard Houllier and how badly that went. But yeah, both managers had equal rights. Bazilevich was a theorist, while Lobanovskyi was in charge of the training process. So I
Mm.
assume in theories is more of the tactician. Lobanovskyi was a big believer in understanding player loads, which actually is really quite early in terms of player loads and management. We see how detailed that is today with companies like StatDNA that will tell you all sorts of information about players running and
Mm.
heart rate. But Lobanovskyi was a big believer in that and had early adopted data scientists into his team to actually make sure the players are loaded correctly and how he could train them in his
Mm.
some of his methods.
Some difficult names to pronounce on this podcast, so well done, Etches. Just thought I'd jump in there
Yeah,
with
no
that.
worries. It's good to shed the light on some of the Eastern Europeans, big countries and former greats.
Mm.
A former powerhouse in European football, but unfortunately, as the Western countries have taken a stranglehold, they've struggled. Going back to Dynamo Kiev in '75, they won the European Cup Winners' Cup, which was very highly regarded at the time. You know, some elite sides won it, including Arsenal actually in '94. Um,
Mm.
and they also won the European Super Cup as well. Dynamo Kiev became the first Soviet club to win a major European trophy, which is also impressive
Mm.
um, as well. But unfortunately, there was an internal rift at the club in 1976, which meant Bazilevich left in '76. Lobanovskyi also left again to manage the Soviet Union solely in '82, but returned after a year because he was sacked by the national team. When he
Mm.
returned, he was again successful, winning the Cup Winners' Cup again in '86, defeating Atletico Madrid 3-0. He kind of just flirted with the Soviet Union Dynamo Kiev for ages until 1990, where he had a clean break and he headed to the Middle East to
Mm.
manage. He returned to Kiev again in '97, where his side reached Champions League semi-final. In 1999, where a young Adrian Shevchenko was a star of the team before he was sold to AC Milan, along with Oleg Luzhny to Arsenal, who apparently is one of Arsenal's worst centre-backs of all time. Sergei Rebrov to Spurs, who my father remembers fondly, and Kaka Kaladze, who went to AC Milan. Interestingly about Lobanovskyi, this is another question as well. I couldn't find the answer for it. He's managed 3 Ballon d'Or winners in Oleg Blovkin, Igor Belanov, and Adrian Shevchenko. And you know what? I actually think that might be a record.
Mm.
I don't know if a manager would have managed 3. So even someone like Ferguson managed 1. He only managed Ronaldo. But yeah, I don't think any manager has won more than has managed to coach that many players to actually win the Ballon d'Or. I don't know. It sounds very impressive to have coached 3. To be fair, so
Yeah, you think about like AC Milan teams that are like Ancelotti even further back as like Arigasaki and stuff. Like of Ancelotti's teams, I mean, you had Ronaldinho and Kaká in the same side. Did Kaká win the Ballon d'Or?
yeah, but he didn't coach. When did Ancelotti coach
Mm,
Ronaldinho? He
yeah,
wasn't there in 2008 when Ronaldinho
nah,
moved there. So someone like Sachi wouldn't have managed in football for long enough.
yeah.
Well, not at the top level. And then I would say someone like maybe actually Ancelotti could be a good one. I'd have to look into that one. But yeah, that's a quiz question for next time.
Yeah, we also did a podcast episode on Shakhtar Donetsk last year as well. So just back to that point around Dynamo Kiev being the first team from the Soviet Union to win a European competition. Shakhtar Donetsk were the first from kind of that region to win, or at least the first Ukrainian side to win the UEFA Cup in 2009. But aside from that, from teams from that region, the USSR, from Ukraine, there's not too many teams that have tasted success on the European stage. So, Lobanovsky's achievements truly were remarkable. And this is before the time of current commercialization and top 5 leagues being so far and away the biggest revenue spinners and arguably having the best sides. Well, not really arguably, but have the best sides. So it was a time when perhaps aside from m- many more nations, if they glowed up as a team, and you had someone like Lobanovskyi come in and implement a great strategy and great philosophy, then possibly it's more likely that they could win European competition. But still, it's still such an achievement, and it just goes to show how progressive and aggressive his playing style was, and how much it seemed to work. And as as we touched on, it seems to still be going strong today.
Yeah, very much so. And unfortunately, moving back to Lobanovskyi, he had to deal with health issues in '88 where he suffered his first heart attack. He basically, his health was deteriorating from that point onwards. He suffered his second heart attack in the autumn of 2001, which required surgery. He couldn't travel to any of Dynamo Kiev's away games due to hypertension and was banned from traveling by air. In 2002, in one of Dynamo Kiev's games, he unfortunately Lobanovskyi fainted and was hospitalized with a stroke. Lobanovskyi then went
Mm.
through brain surgery and his health was listed as critical. But yeah, Lobanovskyi unfortunately didn't regain consciousness and therefore passed away in the 7th of May 2002. So I wanted to kind of move on to his legacy and kind of like what that looks like, because he's one of those people where the average football fan, except for me because I'm far better and greater than the average football fan, don't know anything about him. They just don't, because they weren't accustomed to knowing a great deal about some of those teams at that time. Even our parents' generation may not know him as well, because it was harder to watch Dynamo Kiev, and they,
Mm.
even though they were relatively successful in Europe, they never actually won the Champions League, which is probably what was televised a lot more back then, rather than all of the cup competitions. And even though they had some great players, maybe it was more the USSR that people would have seen, World Cups, etc. But
Mm.
along with Rinus Michels, Lobanovskyi is recognised as being the inventor of, the major playing style known as total football in the '70s. Rinus Michels was at Ajax during that time, and that total football is coined with that term, where it was almost like the perfect sort of what modern football should look like, and is still being used today, or
Mm.
certain variants of it. According to Lobanovskyi, the revolutionary process in football ended in 1974, which was ages ago, and we'll come to that bit a little bit later on. But Lobanovskyi was also credited with bringing a scientific and analytical approach to the game, with a strong emphasis on fitness and diet, which is interesting when we spoke a lot about player loads and stuff, because a lot of that is manual. As I said, Stat DNA now, you need some analysts like myself to just run some data, which is relatively straightforward. But back then, that'd be a lot of
Mm.
manual work, a lot of calculator work, a lot of
Mm.
reading and measurements to get the results that you need. Obviously, it wouldn't be as accurate as it is today, but still very impressive for that time. Many observers recognize Lobanovskyi as the first person to really bring science into football. You know, and it definitely seems from the readings that I've seen and from comments from players and staff that he was definitely ahead of his time.
Yeah, I mean that's incorrect, because it's actually widely known that Peter Reid brought science into football during his stint at Sunderland between '95 and 2002. So just like to refute that allegation made on the podcast.
Yeah. Peter Reid, a legend of the pod. Would love to have him on any time.
You know
So
that when Peter Reid was manager at Sunderland, I didn't even realise this because I was too young, but he also then coached the under-21s for England whilst being
oh,
manager of
really?
Sunderland. I need to get a bit more context to this, because when I was putting that joke into the notes, I thought I'll just check what dates he was at Sunderland, and I noticed he was also coaching the 21s. So bit bizarre if so. Um,
Busy man.
Busy man, yeah.
And I think like the kind of discussion I wanted to touch on, which is what I alluded to earlier, was, is there anything to discover in football, or have we seen it all before? So it's interesting when Lobanovskyi said that, and I do see this a lot. I think there's a lot of things that I've seen as a football fan now that I'm 28, sort of soon to be 28, watched football for, or sorry, soon to be 42, and football's been going on for obviously a very long time. And I think about the Arsene Wenger teams, not so much the Ferguson sides, because I always felt Ferguson was very adaptable and didn't have a necessary style. But I think about the Barcelona teams under Klopp. I think about Mourinho's Inter. I think about Mourinho coming to the Premier League. I think about Klopp's Dortmund and Liverpool. And I think about even the very late bits of some of AC Milan and what they were doing and that sort of stuff, and even Bayern Munich and the Jupp Heynckes, and Even very recently under the guy, I've now forgotten his name, the Germany coach. I've forgotten his name.
Ralph Rangnick.
No, not Ralph Rangnick. But yeah, it's one of those where it's like, have we seen everything in football already? Like, all of these things that go in cycles, right? We've seen possession hungry sides like Pep Guardiola's teams, and that was in the 70s before. Sacchi brought in zonal marking, which changed Italian football and got rid of stoppers. We've seen counter-attacking teams, which are Germans as a national side, and the Joachim Löw became synonymous with, as long as even Leicester, where they used to sit deep, have 20% possession, but then just score on the break and win football matches. So, like, will there be any innovations left in football? It's such an open-ended question where you could go either way. I will say this: Chris Wilder's overlapping CBs was literally never before seen, as far as I'm aware, which is pretty cool. It's not been adopted as widely as you would have maybe thought, but yeah, that was interesting. But yeah, I guess. But then also, there lies in beauty the creation of innovation, right? It's very obvious that you'd say football is completed until someone does something. You're like, oh yeah, that is, that does make a lot of sense. Um, so perhaps we're just waiting for that true innovator of the game to see something and do it.
Yeah, agreed. I think originality becomes more difficult to prove over time. As you allude to, like someone like Klopp style, for example, he seems to be there's inspiration coming from before with Lobanovskyi and co. But they still adapt that to the way in which the game has changed or the way in which they want to play. So it's difficult for I think a manager now to really say that they own a style for that reason because it's football has changed in terms of stadiums have changed, player diets have changed, how good players are and how physical they are has changed. A lot has changed over time, the commercialization, but there's still 11 players on the pitch. The rules are still fairly similar. There's only so many variations of those players being on the pitch that you can enforce to produce a different style of football. There's probably a million different variations, but the fundamental way of setting up a side, and the overarching philosophies that dictate how certain teams play. Possession being a team that keeps possession to starve the opposition before trying to exploit space. A team that presses really high to get their possession back, really high up the pitch near the goal. These are all concepts that there's only so many of those concepts that can exist. But the current managers, current coaches are taking those concepts and adapting them to either the playing staff that they have or the way in which they want to exploit teams themselves. Klopp's use of Trent has been, or just wing backs generally, has been touted as being kind of innovative. Even though his pressing style, has got forefathers. Perhaps they might not have used someone like Trent. I mean, they didn't have Trent, but someone like him in such an advanced way, pressing so high with him. They might have done, but there's still the way in which he could have adapted that would make it his own in a very slight way. If not, it would make him the father of a particular style, but he would be able to own that particular variation of it. So I guess that's the point. And um, yeah, I think back to what I touched on before. I think the evolution of the football player over time could impact the evolution of philosophies and how teams play. But is it relative? I suppose we've got forwards now who are quicker than they've ever been, but we've also got centre backs that are quicker than they've ever been, quicker than they've ever been. So is that relative? We've got Van Dijk now who can match some of the best forwards in the world for pace, and so um, is that relative, or is the fact these players have become a lot quicker? Football as a pace on the game has become a lot faster. Um, has that lent itself to a more high pressing, high intensity philosophy? These players can also run for further distances over longer periods. Has that led itself to this pressing style that has become almost a German? I think I saw an article recently about the Germanification of the Premier League. Um, that maybe it owes itself more to the history and the players that currently occupy the league. But I get the impression that the pressing style and high intensity football could potentially be here to stay, largely because we have got now the capabilities at player level to achieve them. So it's yeah,
I
number
think
of
it's one of
points
those
there.
ones where you want players to be able to do more because they're physically more impressive. So something like pressing would be one of those reasons, but also other things as well, like teams that sit deep but counter very quickly, but also come
Mm.
back into shape very quickly. Because there's the element around, okay, if we lose an attack, I think this is what Mourinho specialized in tactical periodization of when that team loses the ball, how vulnerable are they? So if you say deep, then you counter, but you don't score, then how are that team going to respond and be able to get back on top of you? And I think because players are so physically impressive, they can press a lot higher. And maybe teams that sit deep can counter at real speed. They've got guys that can run the pitch in 10, 12 seconds flat constantly, which then provides whole new different dimension in terms of what players can do. And they can do it for a lot longer. You've got smaller sides as well. Again, these or even big teams that sit deep as well. Concentration is better, fitness is better. So therefore they're happy to not have the ball for 20 minutes and they can just jog around and chase and chase and chase and chase. And that's the beauty of modern medicine. And it's only, I guess we have to wait and see how far it can go.
Yeah, no, agreed. So yeah, we'll wrap up there. Cheers, thanks for the information on Lobanovskyi. Congratulations on some of the pronunciations as well, because they were top draw. But yeah, Ralph Rangnick is now at the Premier League, in the Premier League. So we'll see if United can finally get back to the way they used to be. They have been faltering for a while, so it will really be a shake-up to the league if they do. But again, thanks guys for listening. As always, please subscribe to us on all our platforms, and we will catch you next time.
Cheers, guys.